Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new instant reaction video. Sean here for the Sean Talks Movies podcast. Just got out of the theater from seeing the brand new movie Alien Covenant. Now if you guys are not familiar with this movie, it is part of the Alien franchise, and after seeing it I can definitively say that it does take place in between Prometheus, which came out a couple years ago, and the original Alien movie from 1979. And basically it's about a colony ship that is going to some new planet to find, basically they're going to colonize a new planet and put new human people on there so that they can continue the race or something like that. But along the way something goes wrong with the ship and they actually stumble across another planet that seems to be good, and when they go down to investigate, bad things start happening. And as you can imagine with a movie in the Alien franchise, certain little aliens start to pop up and bad things happen to the crew or something like that. The movie stars a few big names here and there. I mean, bigger names. Michael Fassbender is coming back to kind of play the same character he played in Prometheus, and he's doing dual roles in this one, doing David and a new one called Walter. Basically, they're both androids, different types, but, you know, the same model or something like that. We have Katherine Waterston as the lead. Billy Crudup is in there. Danny McBride is a big part, and Carmen Ejogo is in there, and those are the names I remember. And James Franco shows up for literally 2 seconds in a role that was probably left on the cutting room floor. Also, Guy Pearce shows up at the beginning of the movie just to give some connective tissue between this and Prometheus. Just a quick cameo, I guess, more than anything else. But this movie, again, is trying to bridge the gap between Prometheus and the original movies, and we're actually getting a look at the xenomorphs again, you know, the actual alien creatures we saw in the original franchise. And there's a lot of overarching discussion on creation and the ability to be a god, so to speak, and to create life. And I think that the movie gets a little bit muddled as a result. I went into this one kind of expecting something more along the lines of a horror film, kind of like the original movie that Ridley Scott gave us back in the 70s. And I think that a lot of the trailers hype that up. There's scenes in the trailers that don't exist in this movie, I think partially as a result of James Franco being cut from the final film for the most part. But there's a lot of overarching conversation about creation, and I think that it does get muddled in the middle. There's a few moments of actual action, and the movie does get pretty talky all the way through, and it does kind of slow it down. This movie probably could have cut about 30 to 45 minutes of excess, and it would have been a much more effective and engaging film. And for an Alien movie, I mean, when you look at the Alien franchise, you're looking at the original one, which is an effective horror thriller, the second one, which is definitely an effective action movie. They both work for their own reasons, but this one just doesn't really fall in line with either one, aside from having some similar characters with some of the other movies in the franchise, obviously. That being said, there are some cool things about this. The visuals are pretty good. The aliens themselves are a little bit strange to see in full CGI mode. I was hoping that we get a little bit of practical effect, but it seems like they went all CGI with this one. And in certain scenes it works, in other scenes it doesn't really work, and it's a little bit distracting as a result. With a movie like this, you want to have that fear be tangible, and if you don't even feel like the creatures themselves are tangible, it's not going to work. So for that, I mean, it's a little bit of a gray area. I feel very mixed with this particular movie because there are certain things that work well. The final act does work pretty well. It's very predictable. I will say that. You kind of know where this whole thing is going from the get-go. I mean, not the get-go, probably like halfway through the movie, you have a very clear sense of where this is going to go. My biggest issue is that it seems like they're trying to give this illustrious backstory to these terrifying creatures, and I don't think we need it. And rather than just letting them be these space creatures that terrorize humans from time to time, they're trying to give it this backstory and a reason why they exist, and I just don't think it's necessary, and it's almost filling in gaps that didn't need to be filled. And I feel like we are constantly getting things like this out of movies nowadays, especially when we're going back to old franchises, and it just is a little bit too much. And I just feel like, you know, all the credits are Ridley Scott. You know, good on him for making a movie that did have some tense moments, and he still is a good director, but I just think that this is a well that he doesn't need to keep going back to, and it's just something that it's not necessary. We don't need to see more out of this franchise. I know we're going to be getting more out of this. We're going to be getting sequels to Alien Covenant apparently, and I just don't think it's necessary. We don't need these movies, but we're going to be getting them, and they're just going to be padding more and more and trying to give more backstory and more explanation. And I think part of the reason that the first ones work so well is that there is no explanation. These are just terrifying creatures who happen to be running amok, and that's all we really need. I think that when you start to try to give explanation, it sullies it a little bit, and I just don't know if it was necessary for this particular movie. But again, that being said, there's some visual stuff in here that's very good. Katherine Waterston is very good, but I don't think she gets as much of an emotional punch as our lead heroine as maybe Sigourney Weaver did back in the 70s, and I know that's a lot to live up to. But Danny McBride is good. He probably has one of the bigger roles in the movie as well. Demian Bashir shows up. I don't know if I mentioned him. The acting is fine. There's nothing really amazing about any of it, but for the most part, this movie just felt a little bit unnecessary, and it just didn't really need to give us all this explanation that it was giving. And I just think it's interesting. There were people in the theater who were definitely into the movie. They were kind of oohing and awing with all of the spectacle of it, and sure, there's going to be people out there for it. They just want to go see it because it's an Alien movie. It's got that name brand that everybody knows, but I just don't know if we need that anymore, and I'm starting to get a little sick of it, to be honest with you. And it feels like they're catering to an audience who needs to have things explained, and really it's the idea of show versus tell. And if you look at the original, and it's so bad because I don't want to compare it to the original movie, but it's hard not to. But if you look at the original movie, we just get the show. They just show us this creature. We see it unfold over the course of the movie what this creature is capable of. This movie, they're very much telling us exactly the process of how this has all come about. And it's when you have to spell those things out that you start to distance an audience and distance a viewer, because you're spoon feeding it to them, and that's what a lot of these movies feel like. And it's, you know, I walked out of the theater, I was like, all right, that was okay, but even, you know, like 10, 15 minutes later now, I'm starting to get a little pissed off about it, to be honest. Even just the course of this video, I'm starting to get more pissed off, because it feels like they don't think the audience can figure it out on their own, and they need to spell everything out for us. And it's really, I think it's just a way for them to go back to the franchise and make a little bit more money. And once again, they're just banking off of the brand name, you know, the franchise name. And I mean, if you look back at Prometheus, they didn't call that Alien Prometheus, they called it just Prometheus. And I think that it probably didn't make as much money as, you know, some of the other movies, you know, sequels that we've been getting lately because of that thing alone. I mean, when they put out Rogue One, they called it Rogue One, a Star Wars story, just because they wanted to have that name brand in there. And I think that this is a movie that is just there to get a quick buck. And it's sad because I was expecting a lot out of this movie, and I was hoping it was going to be good, a good little horror thriller, you know, harken back to the original movie, but there's just a lot here that I'm going to be chewing on for a little bit, and I just think it's trying to be more philosophical than it needs to be for a movie about a killer alien. And I know that I'm going to get a lot of because I'm the #1 person to say, hey, we need a little bit more here, but this is just too much, and it's just too philosophical for its own good. We didn't need all of this, and it almost feels like Ridley Scott is trying to examine his own mortality through this franchise in a way, and that's why we're getting all of this conversation about philosophy and creation and all this stuff, and it just is very interesting to look at. And I know that going into this movie, I saw that this movie was getting fairly positive reviews. I'm actually going to go in and take a look and see what some of those reviews were looking like, because I'm a little bit intrigued to see what critics are saying about this movie. But for me, my instant reaction is that I'm starting to get a little bit pissed off about this movie, even just a few minutes after seeing it. I walked out, thought it was decent, but now I don't know. It just feels entirely unnecessary, and it feels like they're pandering to an audience that isn't necessarily asking to be pandered to. So take this review with a grain of salt, I suppose. I'm just your resident cynic, if you will, just trying to dispel any goodness about any movie whatsoever. It feels more and more like that with these big budget movies, and I really just got to delve deeper into some of the smaller movies to really find some good. So with that, Alien Covenant is out in theaters right now. Again, I wanted to see this early because it was one of my more anticipated movies of the spring, and I'm a little bit underwhelmed. I do have to say that, and the more I think about it, I feel like I'm going to be more underwhelmed with it. That being said, thank you guys for watching this instant reaction video from the Sean Talks Movies podcast. Once again, my name is Sean.